Hello, hello. I'm Casey.
And I'm Fallon.
And this is
Render the Darkness.
Okay, so the fact for this episode is the tiny pocket in jeans was originally designed for storing pocket watches.
Really?
I think most people now use them for Zippos.
Yes.
Okay, so that leads me to a joke.
Okay.
What's the difference between a Zippo and a hippo?
I don't know what.
One's a little lighter.
Dad joke.
All right, back to seriousness. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Need a little bit of humor every now and then.
Your tiny pocket is a Zippo for your hippo.
Oh my gosh. That's great. Okay, so this episode is the second part of the Black Dahlia.
AKA Elizabeth Short.
Yes. We left off talking about how the lead investigator, Jack Donahue, thought that someone had killed Elizabeth somewhere else and put her body where she had been found by the woman who went for a walk with her baby on January 15th, 1947. In this episode, we're going to talk about some of the suspects, some of the confessions, theories, some of the other crimes that may be connected, and some of the rumors that are out there. I also want to make a correction from the last episode. I had said that Layla Welsh was 21 when she was murdered in her home, but she was actually 24. I do apologize for that mistake. Okay, so because of how famous the case was, there were a lot of people that actually tried to confess to this murder. None of them actually seemed credible. When the investigation first started, there were 60 confessions, which were made by mainly men. But since that time, there have been 500 people that have confessed to the crime.
Okay, so just so I'm understanding what you just said, people who did not commit the crime were claiming that they did commit the crime just because they were trying to gain some kind of fame from it?
I guess that's the only thing I can think of.
Why would that be what you want to be famous for?
I really don't know. I don't know why you would want to go down in history as somebody to do that, but I don't know.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, very fine. Now, one of the strange parts was that some of the people were not even born at the time of her death that were confessing to her murder.
Oh, wow. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, one of the detectives that was working on the case, Ralph Estel, told Times he thinks he had interviewed her killer. He was someone that was seen in a lot where her body had been found on January 15th, 1947. There was a gentleman that went to the lot to dispose of some lawn clippings, and he noticed a sedan that had the rear door open and the driver was just standing in the lot. But whenever he noticed that he'd been seen, he got back into his car and drove away. He was later cleared of any wrongdoing, though. Even though there had been many suspects that the police looked into, there are about 7 that they talk about, but we're actually only going to really discuss 3 because they just seem to be more information out there on them, and they just seem to be a little bit more, I don't want to just say credible, but
more likely.
Yeah. So we're just going to talk about those 3. Now, the first suspect that we are going to talk about is Leslie Dillon. Leslie Dillon was born in, sorry if I mispronounce this, Ralston, Oklahoma, on July 4th, 1921.
Oh, Independence Day, baby.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was like, oh. When he had reached his 20s, he was 6 feet tall and weighed around 135 pounds. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and had a scar on his left eye. Now, Dr. J. Paul DeRiver, who was a LAPD psychiatrist, received a letter from a guy named Jack Sand, which is an alias that Leslie would use, saying that he had a theory on Elizabeth's murder. They started writing back and forth and eventually agreed to meet in person in Las Vegas, Nevada. Leslie said that he had a suspect, but Dr. Rivers said that he thought Jack made for a good suspect himself, in his opinion.
And that backfired?
Yeah, it did. In the later part of December 1948, Sergeant John O'Mara, who worked for the Los Angeles Police Department, went undercover as Dr. Rivers' chauffeur and bodyguard. He went to meet Dr. Rivers at his home along with Lieutenant William Burns, who was the commanding officer of the gangster detail, and they went to Las Vegas to meet Dillon. Now, at this point in time, Leslie was unaware of Lieutenant Williams' presence. So he only thought that it was just them two. Now, once the three met up, they went to Briargate Lodge. That was close to Banning, California. While on the way to Briargate, Dr. River and Dylan were talking. Leslie brought up the subjects of embalming and bleeding. Leslie said that he used to work for the Hahn Funeral Home in Oklahoma City in 1943. Now, Sergeant O'Mara said that he remembered him saying that before a body can be embalmed, they had to make a cut in the upper thigh and insert a tube that would drain the blood. Now, at some point in time while they were together, Leslie had shown Dr. River a picture of a woman that Sergeant O'Mara said looked like Madonna. He said, quote, "The picture of the woman had very attractive hair, you might say as to Dylan's idea of attractive hair," end quote. Not sure what that means. I tried to find it, but I was just like, oh, okay. Now, after a few days, the three of them drove into Los Angeles. Leslie said something about wanting to go to San Francisco, but they decided just to go to Los Angeles instead. O'Mara said that, quote, "I noticed that he became increasingly apprehensive as we approached Los Angeles," end quote. Now, when they left the hotel, they stopped at Jiggs Moore Trailer Court, and Leslie rushed out of the car and into the office and had Moore change a date on his registration records. Can't say that right. All while O'Mara was close behind, trying not to look suspicious, trying to see exactly what was going to happen. He did say that Leslie wrote down the phone number of the payphone as well. And when they left, they headed towards Dr. Rivers' office, and Leslie said that he knew of the best way to get there, and that was by going over La Brea. Now, O'Mara said that because he pretty much knew where they were going, he decided to turn on Crenshaw. He thought that Leslie was actually trying to get them off track. But Dr. River had insisted that O'Mara turn off of Crenshaw. Now, on the way, Leslie kept telling O'Mara that where he could and couldn't go in order to get to their destination. They eventually arrived at the place where Elizabeth's body had been discovered, and Dr. River told O'Mara to stop and park while Leslie and Dr. River talked for a while. O'Mara kind of stayed in the background to observe. He said that Leslie became, quote, "very agitated, and the doctor says, 'Do you recall now? This was where the body was found.' 'As I recall,' Dylan said. 'What body do you mean? You mean the woman who was stomped and kicked?' You might say offhand, the other murder that happened in West Los Angeles, where a woman was kicked. At least there was footprints on the body, and the doctor's conversation was, 'You know what I mean. You know what body I mean.' And Dylan didn't have much to say there. He was kind of more nervous than the average person would in casual observation. If somebody told me that, I would say, 'Are you accusing me?' or something like that. He had no statement of that kind. He more or less appeared that he was becoming ill. At least that's the impression I got, and we didn't stay there for very long. We proceeded back to the motel, and the doctor began questioning him again en route to the motel. And when we were proceeding along, he wanted a drink or had to go to the restroom. We stopped in a service station, got out at the service station, and he said something about wanting a Coke. He felt very thirsty. We went over to the Coke machine, and he ordered a Coke, and as I recall, he didn't drink it. He still appeared, very nervous. We got back to the car and drove. Continued on to the motel, and one time there, the doctor was questioning him. He manifested a peculiar thing, you might say. The doctor would question him, and the questions were kind of tight, you might say. He had a habit of sticking his hand out through the wind wing and crowding over closer to the door. Now, it would probably take a psychiatrist to explain why he did that, end quote.
What does the questions were kind of tight mean?
I guess he was just, I'm not 100% sure. Let's see, kind of tight. I wonder what that... Yeah, just Google that.
Let me just Google that real quick. It says, being close or emotionally connected or something being scarce or tense.
Like him and possibly the murder?
I don't really know because it's giving me many different definitions of what that could mean. It means closed. In reference to a question being asked, it means closed.
It means closed?
Like it's a close-ended question.
Closed, okay. Gotcha.
Like he didn't really ask him any questions that he could move away from.
Okay. Three had gone to San Francisco looking for Jeff Connors, who Leslie claimed killed Elizabeth because she threatened to let people know about an affair, but he wasn't able to be located. Leslie was arrested outside of San Francisco by Sergeant, I'm sorry if I mess this up, Bublichki. Detective Brown, who was the homicide detective on the scene, became aware of the new murder suspect when his partner, Harry Hansen, called him on January 10th, 1949. They were told to go downtown as soon as they could. On January 10th, 1949, Leslie was put in jail at Highland Park Station, and later that day, Detective Brown and Hansen questioned him, and the next day they were informed that the San Francisco Police Department had found Jeff Connors. Now, sometime in October 1949, the district attorney investigator, Frank Jennison, thought that assigning the gangster squad and Dr. Rivers to investigate Elizabeth's murder was a mistake, and that the homicide department should have been in control the whole time. In December, the grand jury had interviewed Detective Brown, and they had asked him about the investigation into Leslie, and he said that Leslie had given a statement saying that Mark Hansen had seen a picture of Leslie, and that he looked a lot like the guy that went to see Elizabeth about 5 or 6 times. Now, according to Black Dahlia and Hollywood.com, Detective Brown said, quote, "Now, in the investigation, Mr. Hansen and Miss Toth both told of a man, described him as about 6 feet tall with light hair, driving a light-colored Chevrolet coupe, thought he was a serviceman, picking Elizabeth Short up on several occasions while she lived at that address. At Hansen's address, they stated they could not give a better description because they only saw the man from the house out to the sidewalk or out to the street. And on January the 19th, after Dylan and Connors was in jail, I'd taken the pictures and showed them to Mr. Hansen and asked him if he knew either one of the fellows or recalled the incident on which he told me about. He asked him if he could identify any of the pictures he had showed me there. He stated Dylan did look like the man, prominent view of the Adam's apple, but he wanted to look at the man before he had made an identification. Of course, at that time Dylan was released, and also I asked him if he ever knew the men. Jeff Connors, I knew that he knew Jeff Connors because when he had the listening device in the house, Jeff Connors' correct name is Artie, Lane. His real correct name is Artie Loy. He uses the name of Artie Lane. His wife, Grace Allen, and him had a separation. And she had come to Hansen's house in regard to the separation and fight with her husband, and he had come there looking for her and trying to talk to her. She had called officers, and officers went to her house where she was living with the Lane on Camerford Street and picked up her belongings, and they separated at that time. I knew that Hansen had seen Jeff Connors, in which he admitted he knew the man. When he picked out the pictures, he said he knew the man, that the man looked familiar, end quote. I had to say, the way they talked back in the day, it's kind of confusing.
I like the way they talk back in the day.
I mean, I'm not saying it's interesting, it's just the way he, started off.
They weren't very specific in what they were saying.
No, not at all.
I don't know. I always think of the black and white movies and the, see you later, kid. I always think of that when I think of that time era. I don't think that's how they really talked, but that's just how my brain envisions how they talked.
Yeah, I would like to think they talked that way.
Everybody was from Brooklyn or somewhere.
Yeah.
They all had that accent.
Okay, so at the end of the year in 1949, Detective Brown didn't think that Leslie was a great suspect because they couldn't verify his whereabouts at the time of Elizabeth's murder. Even though he did have alibis from people he knew, some of them didn't seem very credible. And Leslie ended up suing the city of Los Angeles for his false arrest and the damage that it had caused to his reputation. At the end of the investigation, though, Jemison said, quote, "It is the consensus of the officers Ed Barrett, Jack Smear, F.A. Brown, and the undersigned that there is insufficient evidence as of this date, October 28, 1949, upon which any suspect could now be brought to trial for the murder of Elizabeth Short." End quote.
Okay. They may not have had enough to be able to actually accuse him of doing it, but they certainly had reasonable cause for suspicion.
Oh, for sure.
So for him to sue them for I wouldn't say it was a false arrest. I mean, if they suspected him, they had to arrest him to bring him in, right?
Yeah, I mean, unless they just didn't have a good enough, solid case against him. But, I mean, they figured in order to arrest him, they would have to have something.
Well, I know in a lot of this murder cases or homicide cases, like they can ask people to come in and they're not necessarily under arrest. But if you have somebody that's unwilling to cooperate, but you also have a reasonable suspicion of that person, I think that I don't know how it was back then, but I'm pretty sure now a reason to suspect is enough of a reason for them to make them come in for questioning at the very least.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I wouldn't say what they did was, like, false.
Yeah, and I didn't really see anywhere of, like, if he actually won that.
I was say, did he win that
I didn't see.
suit?
So, I mean, I don't know if he did or not.
It would be interesting if he did.
Yeah.
Because that would kind of be, saying to the communities that, if you're ever a suspect and you get arrested because you're a suspect, then you have the ability to sue if you're proven innocent.
Right, yeah. Okay, so the next suspect that we will talk about is George Hodel, sorry. Now, when the district attorney was conducting the investigation, Dr. George Hodel became a good suspect. He was placed under surveillance in February 1950. He was followed around when he was out doing his normal daily activities and while he was meeting up with different people. And by the time spring rolled around in 1950, he was really being looked into by the police, and they were thinking that he was the murderer of Elizabeth. Now, Jemison interviewed George's second wife, Dorothy. At this time, they had been divorced, but had remained pretty good friends on March 22nd, 1950. And he told her that he knew he was going to show her a picture to see if she recognized the woman in the photo. When he showed her, she said, quote, "No, I never have," end quote. He then asked her if her husband had ever seen her, and she said, quote, "They can't pin murder on me. To the best of my knowledge, he didn't and doesn't know her," end quote. He proceeded to try and get any information he could out of her, but she didn't think he could have done it, and she said, quote, "I know he has never practiced surgery. His branch of medicine is VD, which is venereal diseases, generally in administrative medicine," end quote. Jemison was unable to get any more information from Dorothy. He let her know that they did have information showing that the last place Elizabeth had been seen alive was the Baltimore Hotel, where her and her former husband frequented in the evening on January 9th, 1947. George was never arrested or convicted of the murder, and he passed away at the age of 91 in 1999. And this is kind of the interesting part here. Now, after his death, his son, Steve, actually suspected his dad of having something to do with her death.
Okay.
He had written about his suspicions about his dad in his book series called Black Dahlia Avenger. Joanne Elater, I'm going to say, of the Sun Hornell wrote an article about an interview she had with Steve about the possible connection between his father and the Black Dahlia murder. Steve gained a really good reputation as a reliable homicide detective, and after his father's death, he started going through his belongings. Well, he came across two photos of a woman that had dark curly hair that looked an awful lot like Elizabeth.
Okay.
Now, Steve dove deeper into the case. He noticed that there was a specific surgical procedure that she had endured that was taught in medical schools during the time his father was going to school in the 1930s. He also thought that the letters from the Black Dahlia Avenger looked like his dad's handwriting. Now, Steve does have a website called stevehodel.com where he talks about the murder as well as others. There are all kinds of interesting information on that site. If you're interested in learning more, you should definitely go check it out. I will link the website in the show notes. After the original investigation happened, it is known that Elizabeth went missing on January 9th, 1947, and her body was later discovered on January 15th. However, there are some details that make this timeline questionable, because remember that she came back home on January 9th after a trip to San Francisco with Robert Manley, and that some people did see her later that night at the Crown Grill Cocktail Lounge.
Mm-hmm.
There are also reports of her being seen all throughout the week. According to HornellSun.com, in November 2004, Stephen Key, who was the head deputy district attorney of the LA County, said, quote, "The most haunting murder mystery in Los Angeles County during the 20th century has finally been solved in the 21st century. I have no doubt in my mind that George Hodel murdered Elizabeth Short and Janine French," end quote. Okay, so even though he seemed to be very confident, there was no concrete evidence to back that claim up. Steve sent Joanna a copy of his book, and the book talks about his findings and his thoughts on the case. He does say that the other suspects do not compare to his father, and he shows readers that the evidence shows his father is connected to the murder. but he could be one of the most prolific and sadistic serial killers of all time, according to HornellSun.com. So I just think it's crazy that the LA or the deputy district attorney actually said that her murder was solved,
Yeah.
and it wasn't.
I don't. Maybe because they were getting so many people calling in and trying to claim to be the murderers, and they were getting put in so many different directions with so many tips. Because if they get a call like that, they have to follow that tip.
Yeah, no, but he was saying that George did it.
Right.
So it's like.
But they never actually officially booked George in as the one who did it.
No, there's no concrete evidence to prove that he did it. So that to me was just like, what? Okay, so the last suspect that we will talk a little bit about is...
It is pretty suspicious, though, that even George's own son was like, yeah, I think he did it.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to think that the son had some kind of inside information. And, too, when it comes to police work and stuff like that, like, they don't release everything to the public. So there's a lot of information and knowledge that they're privy to that we don't know that they have.
Yeah, and another crazy thing on his website that I was reading is he actually thinks that his dad might also be the Zodiac killer.
I was going to say, his name sounds familiar. I remember it being attached to the Zodiac killer case, because I do remember, I think he did an interview that I seen where he had come out and talked about him thinking his dad was in connection with that.
Yeah, I just was like, what? That's crazy.
So he had to know something. I mean, not only to accuse your father, but to do it so publicly and outly.
Books and interviews and a website. Yeah. The last suspect that we will talk a little bit about is George Knowlton. Now, Janice Knowlton, who was his daughter, believes that she has known who killed Elizabeth this whole time. She was 10 when they found the mutilated body of Elizabeth on January 15th, 1947. And it's been 40 years since Janice says that she has horrifying and long repressed memories that have made her sure that George Knowlton, who has passed away years ago, was the one that killed Elizabeth, according to LATimes.com. And she claimed that she watched as her father beat Elizabeth with a claw hammer in the garage of their family home.
Oh, wow.
She said that they had been having an affair and that she was staying in a bedroom in the garage, that she had actually had a miscarriage while staying there. And Janice said that later he forced her to go with him while he got rid of her body. In 1991, she convinced the Westminster police to search for evidence of her murder as well as another murder that she thought her father had committed. And they dug up the vacant lot that her old house used to sit on, but they didn't find anything worth noting. She later wrote a book called Daddy Was a Black Dahlia Killer that talked about incest, rape, and murder. People eventually stopped focusing on her, but Larry, I'm sorry if I mess this up, Harnish, a Times editor who wrote for the paper in 1997 about the Black Dahlia, said, quote, "Anytime we ran anything about the Black Dahlia case, she'd leave long rambling voice messages on my answering machine at the Times," end quote. Now, when he didn't hear from her after Steve Hodl's book came out called Black Dahlia Avenger, A Genius for Murder, he was curious as to why. So he began to do some digging and learned that on March 5th, she had passed away at her home at the age of 67. Her death was classified as a suicide from taking 5 different medications at the same time. Her stepsister, Jolene Emerson, said that she didn't think Janice had done it on purpose. She also said that her stepsister's supposed memories put a strain on the family's relationships, according to the LATimes.com. She also said, quote, "Her book was trash and it wasn't even true. She believed it, but it wasn't reality. I know because I lived with her father for 16 years, end quote. She also said her stepfather, who died in a car crash in 1962 with his son Kevin, could be meaner and ornerier than heck, but he wasn't a killer, end quote. The LA police and the Westminster police didn't have much faith in Janice's story when it first came out. Now, John P. St. John, a LAPD homicide detective, told the Times in 1991 that, quote, "The things that she is saying are not consistent with the facts of the case," end quote. Now, I'm going to go ahead and let you know here that there is a content warning. There is mention of sexual violence towards a child here. Now, in her book, it says that she had gone to Elizabeth's apartment with her dad. He started to bring people in to rape her. And after her dad had killed Elizabeth, he had Janice go with him as cover to be able to dispose of the body that was wrapped in a blanket. He tried to dump her in the ocean by the Seal Beach Pier at first, but she wouldn't sink, so he took her body to Los Angeles. Now, Janice and the co-author of the book, Newton, say that they did find circumstantial evidence that included the search for a suspect by the name George, who drove a tan car. Janice said that her dad drove a tan car. They also claim that Ted Driscoll, who is now deceased, said that he dated one of Elizabeth's roommates and that he had remembered seeing a man at the apartment who said his name was George. Newton told the Times in 1993, quote, "The physical description he gave to several of his neighbors before he passed on fits George Knowlton to a T, right down to the fact of the compulsive deer hunting, the work in a foundry, and having come from a New England town near where Short was born. To have another George who fit that description to me would be almost coincidental, beyond the realm of possibility," end quote. Alright, so now here is where we will talk about the possible crimes that could be connected to the Black Dahlia murders, but you can decide for yourself after you hear about these other murders that occurred around the same time frame.
Okay. I will.
Some crime authors and Detective Peter Merlo think that there is a possible link to Elizabeth's murder and the Cleveland torso murders committed by the serial killer also known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, that was on a killing spree in the 1930s.
Okay.
There were 13 known victims, and they all had been dismembered, and they had been disposed of in Kingsbury Run. The police thought the connection between the two could have been because the torso murderer, or the Mad Butcher, had supposedly sent a letter saying that he moved to California and he had killed a woman and buried her head. But upon further investigation, only animal bones were uncovered. Also because Elizabeth and the victims of the Mad Butcher were cleaned after their deaths, and a butcher knife was thought to have been used in both cases. However, the Mad Butcher's signature was decapitation. And her murder actually happened almost a decade after the letter was received. So besides circumstantial evidence, there was nothing that really connected the two.
Yeah, that seems like a bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
To attach those.
Steve Huddle and William Rasmussen have said they think there is a link between Elizabeth and Suzanne Degner's murder. Captain Donahue of the LAPD said publicly that he thought that the Black Dahlia and the lipstick murders were connected.
I remember lipstick murders.
Now, some of the evidence that was that Elizabeth's body was found in North Avenue, 3 blocks west of Degner Boulevard, which is the last name of the victim in Chicago.
Okay.
They say that the ransom note handwriting on the Degner case matched the handwriting from the letter of the Black Dahlia Avenger, because both of them contained capital and lowercase letters and had a similar mishappen P. And there was one word that is said to have matched exactly. I'm not sure what that word was.
Okay.
William Hernandez, who was convicted in the Degner murder, said he was tortured by the police until he gave a confession. So Williams passed away on March 5th in 2012 due to health problems. Now, I'm going to let you know there is a content warning here. There is mention of sexual violence in this part. The lone woman murders happened from 1943 to 1949. The police thought it was just one person who was committing the crimes. The killer targeted young, attractive women and sexually assaulted and sexually mutilated some of them. There were more than 12 murders, which did include Elizabeth. Now, I will talk a little bit about each murder, but I won't go into major detail. On July 27th, 1943, the naked body of a 41-year-old woman named Ora Elizabeth Murray was found by the parking lot of the Fox Hill Golf Course. She had been beaten and strangled to death. On October 12, 1944, the body of 20-year-old Georgette Elise Baydorf was discovered face down in her bathtub. They think that this murder was connected because Elizabeth had supposedly worked at the Hollywood Canteen where Georgette worked as a hostess. On February 10, 1947, the body of 44-year-old Janine Nettie French was discovered on Grandview Boulevard naked and beaten and had the words "Fuck you, BD" written on her stomach in lipstick. They also thought that this murder was connected because the media pushed hard that the BD stood for Black Dahlia, but it was actually proven that the letters were PD, which stood for Police Department. On March 12, 1947, the naked body of 43-year-old Evelyn Winters was discovered in a vacant lot in an abandoned rail yard in Norwalk, California. She had been beaten and strangled to death. On May 4th, 1947, the body of 36-year-old Dorothy Ella Montgomery was discovered in a field. She had been found naked and had been beaten and strangled to death. On May 12th, 1947, the body of 39-year-old Laura Eliza Trilstad was found in an oil field on Long Beach Boulevard and was said to have been sexually assaulted, beaten, and strangled before being thrown from a moving vehicle. On July 8th, 1947, the naked body of 21-year-old Rosinda Josephine Andragon was found in a gutter near the Los Angeles City Hall, and she had been strangled with a silk stocking. On October 2nd, 1947, Lillian Dominguez, who was 15, was walking with her sister and her friend when a man came up to them and stabbed Lillian in the heart with a long, thin, stiletto-type blade.
Oh my gosh.
On October 9th, 1947, someone left a note under the door of a furniture store that said, "I killed this Santa Monica girl. I will kill others." On February 14th, 1948, the body of 42-year-old Gladys Eugenia Kern was found in a house she was showing in the Los Feliz district. She had been stabbed in the back with a hunting knife. On June 13th, 1949, the body of 35-year-old Louise Margaret Springer was found in the back seat of her husband's car in south central part of Los Angeles. She had been strangled with a clothesline and a stick had been found in her anus.
Oh.
Yeah, that one was pretty bad.
Wow.
Mimi Boomhauer was 48 when she went missing. She was last heard from on August 18th, 1949. Her purse was found 5 days later in a phone booth at a grocery store in Los Angeles. She was never seen again. Jean Elizabeth Spangler went missing on October 7th, 1949. She was 26 years old. She made a phone call to her sister-in-law saying she was going to meet her ex-husband before she went off to work. The last time she was seen was at a grocery store a little way from her home. 2 days later, her purse was found in Griffith Park. Unfortunately, none of these murders were ever solved. Here's where we will talk about some of the rumors. The media started printing things that were not true. Now, I'm not sure if they did that because they were trying to sell more papers or not, but it seems that is probably the reason, but that's just my opinion. They said that when Elizabeth was discovered that she had been tortured, that there were cigarette burns all over her body that she had received while she was still alive, but there was nothing on her autopsy report that stated these things. The media also reported that the coroner said that there was, based on his findings, feces in her stomach, which would indicate that she had been forced to eat fecal matter.
Oh, God.
Yeah. But Harnish just denied that, and again, it's not stated on her autopsy report. So I don't know where they got that information. And it's also rumored that she had got her nickname because she put dahlias in her hair, which is a type of flower. There are other rumors saying that she got her nickname because it was given to her by the newspaper reporters covering her murder. Other people say she had it for most of her life. But Harnish says that the Black Dahlia nickname was given to her by the people that worked at the Long Beach drugstore, which if you remember in part 1, we talked about that. Mm-hmm. Now, these are just some of the rumors that were out there. There are other ones that I did not want to get into they weren't really graphic, but I don't know if they were, I don't know how to explain it. It's just something I did not want to go into detail about.
Okay, fair enough.
So if you want to, find more information about that, you can definitely find it online. Now, Elizabeth was buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland. When her younger sister grew up and got married, her mother decided to move back to Oakland to be closer to her grave. And then she moved back to the East Coast in the 1970s, and she passed away in 1992. Mm-hmm. Now, I couldn't find out exactly how old she was, but she was in her 90s.
Mm-hmm. She got to live a long life.
Yeah, she did. 2 weeks after Elizabeth's murder, Republican Assemblyman C. Don Field introduced a bill calling for the development of a sex offender registry. California would be the first U.S. state to make it to where sex offenders had to register when they moved into the state.
Good.
So that, that was definitely a good thing. So that is part 2 of the Black Dahlia. And this case is so sad for so many different reasons, but it not being solved really makes me sad. Hopefully one day she will get the justice she rightfully deserves. We would like to thank you for listening and spending your valuable time with us. We really do appreciate each and every one of you. We would like to say again, if you have something you would like us to do an episode on, please let us know through any of our social media platforms, YouTube, and you can send us an email at Damn it. It's right there. I don't know what. We just need to change it to Render the Podcast. That's just it.
That would be it. That would be right. That's not the email, fella. That's not what we agreed on.
So please let us know through any of our social media platforms, YouTube, and you can send us an email at renderthedarknesspod@gmail.com.
Nice. Good job. You got it that time. Also, I would like to add to, again, if you have a story that you personally would like to tell that's close to you or a family member or friend, or just a story that you know about that you don't often hear covered and you would like your opportunity to get on a platform and do that, we are fully capable of bringing you onto the show, whether it be through a phone call or via Zoom or however you feel comfortable to be a guest. But we would definitely like to invite our audience to come on the show and be guests.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
But other than that, as Fallon said, thank you for spending your time with us today. We hope you enjoyed the case, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.
We are Render the Darkness.
Bye.
Bye.